I'm in my car on the way to the Black Lives Matter protest. I've struggled in my time being the age I am. I've seen a lot of these incidences where I do believe racial profiling and discrimination and prejudice has led to members of the law taking the law into their own hands and killing innocent people who happen to be from the African diaspora.
Welcome to the Urban Ministry Show. I've got my old friend Shabazz here. Hello, Shabazz.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good, bruv. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm just going to introduce you to everyone. So Shabazz is a writer, a director. He's a former rapper. In fact, so you might know him as Asa Shabazz from Zion Noiz.
You remember?
And there might be some people out there who, as they heard that, went doo 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 doo. That's what I'm hoping for, anyway. And if you don't know, you got to get to know. So do a search for Zion Noiz and check out actually a landmark video, Shabazz, that you made for Zion Noiz.
Oh snap! Remember?
Yeah, and what? Oh my days! Oh my days, bruv. That was a bit of history there. You making that video. I mean, right now, I'm getting excited.
At the time, it did feel like it, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
I can't hear the noise of Zion. War sirens like the roar of a lion. Iron or hardcore strike with an iron fist. Zionists of the King Kong out of this concrete jungle. Sonship, sons who fight united as one for one truth. If hip hop was a family, consider us an uncle. You never knew about till you heard the crowd shout.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, which was like the MTV of its day. Which was very surprising, even for us. We're like, snap. London seems to like this kind of music and stuff. So and bruv, the day you told me that I remember you saying you were retiring from rapping. Did I say that?
And you said I'm going to focus on filmmaking now.
Okay.
And I was sad. I was like a bit brokenhearted. I was like, I can't believe you're giving this up. But then what I saw was just you're one of these talented brothers that you could do really well in one field, and then God's blessed you that you do really well in another field.
That's kind of
and you were being strategic with your gifts. But I must say,
that's kind of,
I love to hear your voice, and you probably won't remember this, but I did a remix of
No, I do.
Step Up.
I do. I remember it clearly. You killed it. You killed it.
So yeah, but I remember sitting there with headphones, just with your track, your voice soloed, and listening to it and being like, what a voice! Like,
Thank you.
I loved hearing you rap.
I'm gonna give you literally an exclusive then, yeah. So Zion Noiz basically are reforming, you might as well call it that.
Okay.
We're coming back together to do re-release the album and do a new album. It's been headed off by Pharaoh, also known as Smooth Flow. We've got everyone back, including, say, Jahazel, Green Jay, Dwayne Triumph. And we're basically going to do more than just music. We're going to also launch a podcast. Actually, this is the first time I've actually said it, so you heard it first.
Exclusive right here
on the show. So yeah, we basically are looking to want to be a voice to our community and share some of our concepts and ideas. So it'd be like a creative think tank as well.
Wow. I'm looking forward to that, bro. Great. I'm looking forward to that very much.
Nice one.
Now we did a project together for the Runnymede Trust. I don't know if you remember.
Dude,
This is where I live, and I did a grime track, a grime track for it. and you had the back then were they still called the JCMCs? I can't remember.
JCMCs, mate. Yeah, literally Courtney, Jordan, all of those guys. Wow, Duncan.
Yeah.
Literally, we go back. When was that? That was like early 2000, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Something
yeah.
like
It was. I'm guessing it was like 2004 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So you're also a husband and a father.
Thank God, yeah, absolutely.
And
got married about five years ago. It's my fifth anniversary the other day. I should remember that.
congratulations.
Got a little boy as well.
And also, Shabazz, I've just really appreciated you being a voice on the internet and on the radio waves. You know, when you phone into LBC, you've been a voice sharing about some important stuff. And the way you share about it, I really appreciate the way you share about stuff. And
Thanks,
so when I heard you on LBC chatting about the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests, you know, I was straight away like, I was like, look, I don't want to be that white guy who phones up one of his black friends and says, can you do an interview at this time? I don't want to be that guy. And at the same time, I was like, what Shabazz is saying, if people on my channel can hear that, I would really love that. So I came to you kind of hoping you'd say yes, but also thinking I understand if you wouldn't say yes, because I know a lot of people are very tired right now and people keep getting asked, what do you think about this and what do you think about that and all that. I'm so thankful, bruv, that you were willing to share about your experience at a protest.
Mate, the honor is genuinely all mine. And for me, it's not a white guy calling me to ask me on a radio show. It's a friend, it's a brother. And I know your heart, I know your ministry, and I know what you're wanting to do in regards to help there be a bit of unity. So, bro, it was an honor, like genuinely hearing from you. So yeah, I'm honored to be here, man.
Cool. Well, so I just explained to everyone, Shabazz went to the Black Lives Matter protest 2 Saturdays ago on the 6th of June, right?
Yeah. Is this? Yeah, okay, yeah, probably.
Shabazz also had his phone with him. So he took some snaps, took some shots of what was going on. So we're actually going to play through some of that stuff. I'm going to ask Shabazz some questions about it. And we're going to learn from you, bruv. And hopefully just all of us can get some more understanding about the protests that have been going on. So to start off with, you said this. I thought this was so deep. When you were sitting in your car, filming yourself just before you got to go to the protest, this is what you said.
In the middle of a pandemic, we come to fight an epidemic. A racial epidemic.
So, bruv, that was deep. That was deep. And I would just love it if you could unpack that for us.
No doubt. So even at that point, I was driving through the streets and I'd seen a lot of different people on their way to this protest. And it made me realize, oh, snap, there's a lot of solidarity. And that made me feel like everyone who is going to this protest is doing it to some degree against government guidelines, because at that time, obviously, the government had said, you know, stay at home, you know, what, danger, it's COVID and everything. And I know a lot of people basically were shocked that, you know, they kind of thought, well, people shouldn't be so careless to go out and protest at a time literally where there is a pandemic. But for me, it had almost a reverse effect. It made me kind of feel, this is how serious this issue is. This epidemic, this, you know, pandemic, a lot of people have even described racism as a pandemic. It's so important that it's just, we need to basically even risk everything to basically resolve it. And obviously you can't tell your emotions to sit down for 2 weeks and wait until Boris Johnson gives us the thumbs up. Do you know what I mean? You have to almost respond to how you were feeling. And there were obviously a lot of people that were angry at that time and going through a level of, you know, different layers of trauma. And when someone is traumatized or when someone is affected and moved, you can't not act. You can't stay at home. You have to kind of, to some degree, risk all. And that sounds selfish, but I did see a lot of people wearing masks. I didn't see much social distancing, but you can only social distance so much at a protest. But I just think it shows the severity of what's happening. The world has come together to say, we've had enough of this pandemic. We've had enough of this epidemic against a certain group of people, that we feel there now needs to be a time, and this might be the time, where we rise up to do something about it.
Yeah, definitely. And what was interesting is then when you got out the car, you started doing the footage. To me as a viewer, it looked like there also had been a bit of a shift, because like, you know, and depending whose definition you use, a pandemic would be something that goes across multiple countries, multiple continents. It's all over the world. Whereas an epidemic would be something in one area or restricted to one group of people. And in some ways, it seems to me like in Britain, the racism problem has been seen as something that the Black community, for want of a better phrase, has to deal with. Like, they got to deal with it. Narratives I've heard has even been harsh stuff like they've got to get over it, or they've got to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and just sort themselves out, and it's been talked about as if it's a problem for Black people to deal with, in which case it would be a epidemic, whereas a pandemic, the whole world's got to deal with it. We're all in together. It looked to me, bruv, like on the footage you got there, it looked to me like actually there were lots of different people coming together and saying, actually, racism is a pandemic. Like, we're all in this together and we've all got to fight this together.
Yeah. Duncan, that was the biggest surprise to me. I'll be honest with you. Just to say, I don't normally go to protests. I'm not really a protest guy. I'll be honest with you. And I'm a filmmaker. Majority of the times that I've gone to protests, I mean, I've done documentaries on the EDL, and I've gone to, like, you know, racially infused charged areas where you've got the left and the right fighting and throwing bombs at each other, you know, and I've been the observer with a camera, and that's been my motivation for going. Never have I left the camera at home and basically just said, I'm just going to go down. With this one, I was challenged by an old friend of ours, actually, Jahazel. He basically kind of, you know, in a group, WhatsApp group that I'm in, the Zion Noiz group, he kind of kicked a lot of us up our backside by saying, what are we doing to stop this? One of the things he basically said was he hardly ever sees, say, Christians at protests and the church at protests, which is another topic. We tend to basically, fight with our silence. And so I thought, you know what, I actually want to go to this protest, not to prove him wrong, but to actually listen to his advice, be taught a lesson, and let me just go and observe and see and feel what is happening at this protest. It was the best thing I could ever do, mate. I'll be honest with you, because I just loved seeing first eye accounts of the multiculturalness of it, the solidarity, the warmth, the peacefulness of it. I mean, I was there prior to it kicking off late in the evening when, you know, there were some horses that would basically charge at protesters. And I don't get into the politics of the violent stuff because I don't agree necessarily with the violence. The peaceful side of it, we walked from Parliament all the way to the American embassy. Yes, people were angry. Yes, people were shouting. Yes, people were crying. But there was a genuine sense of the world, the human race has come together to fight racism. Just to say as well as a disclaimer, so I don't like using terms like race, racism, or racist, because they are founded on a very unstable principle, because there is genuinely only one race. The human race has wrongly been split up into what we are calling racial categories or racial groups. The origin of race in and of itself came from a very prejudiced and a very discriminatory basis. It was a desire for there to be a hierarchy in humanity where one group sat at the top and another group sat at the bottom. So we're dealing with the consequences of a very false pseudoscience, as it were. We should genuinely, I would love to see us actually abandon that term. Yes, it won't remove the hate in people's heart for people who have a different skin complexion than them, but it will be a start to actually begin to unpack some of the spider web that we've caught ourselves in, 500 years after the term was first created, or something like that.
Yeah, I hear you, bruv. And just, I told you the other day or last night that just on Sunday at our church, I was doing a talk about race.
Saw it, mate. It was blinding. Loved it.
And it is so hard, isn't it? After so many hundreds of years of brainwashing about race, it's so hard. And what was encouraging to me in your footage was I was seeing stuff where I was like, rah, are people actually getting it now that we're one race?
Mate.
Let me play some of the footage here. You got this guy with his sign, racism is a pandemic.
Yeah.
So there you got a white guy saying racism is a pandemic. If we just play this clip then of you commenting on what you were seeing there as well.
To every, say, one black person, there's like 5, 10 white people. So this isn't just a black struggle. This isn't just a black issue. This genuinely is something that has affected more than just, say, the black community. And I love that. I mean, look at this. It would be amazing if literally we remembered this day and actually saw that this wasn't just a white protest or a black protest. It was a family protest, the human race protest. We weren't one race, because those races don't exist. It's actually a race. The human race is basically protesting against an injustice, and that's what I like about this the most.
Mate.
Wow. So, bruv, do you feel that more people are getting that we are one race, the human race?
So I can only speak based on what I hope rather than the facts of definitely they're getting it, because I've had a lot of hope in the past that has been let down, because at a moment in time there's another killing, there's a protest, there's a little bit of solidarity, then after a while it dies down. We start to hear of Brexit, or we start to hear of something else is the headline. I'm hoping that isn't the case this time, but I'm not so naive to just jump on the bandwagon of, yes, we're going to see change forever. That is my hope and my goal. But I'm 45 in a couple of weeks, and Duncan, I've never seen in all my 45 years, I've never seen so much solidarity, not just in London. There something I think has awoken that I pray stays awake and causes some change. And here's the thing, Duncan. We all know that the definition of crazy is trying to expect a different result, even though you're doing the same thing over and over again. That's crazy. And as a society, as a modern world, we've sent men to space back and forth. We've created the internet. We've had so many amazing feats of, human just brilliance, but we've not been able to resolve this quote unquote racism issue. And we're going around in circles doing the same things and expecting a different result. So unless this time we do something different that hasn't been done before, we're going to see the same results. So there'll be another killing in another 2 years, a year, 6 weeks, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and there'll be another protest. There'll be another looting spree, and we'll go and, presidents and prime ministers will get out and condemn it and use words that basically provoke more racism, and we'll just go around in circles. We shouldn't be so naive to expect this to be different unless we start to see genuine change that's monumental, not just kind of like, circumstantial.
Definitely. So Dawn Butler, the MP,
yes,
she shared how when her and her brother used to go on marches, it was all black people. And now you're seeing all kinds of people on these marches. So there's a change there. But she's also said how there needs to be significant concrete changes made for there to be a difference. Yeah. And when I heard her talking about it, I could also hear the same with, as I'm hearing from you, whatever the opposite is of naivety. Where you realize, look, in some ways we've been here before. We've heard people before saying stuff's got to change there. Yeah. Stephen Lawrence and the Macmillan or Macpherson report that said that the police was institutionally racist.
Yeah.
We thought then maybe there would be some significant changes. Grenfell 3 years ago, last Sunday, that was like I saw people who didn't normally care about these issues,
Yeah.
about how black and brown people are treated. I saw people suddenly getting really concerned about it. And we thought, surely now there will be significant change. And 3 years later, we're like, there isn't significant change. And so I hear from you the hope of maybe there's a shift right now. And at the same time, there's also this
despondency.
What's that?
Despondency or pessimism, maybe.
Yeah, which I think totally makes sense. And I'd love to play this clip, bruv. There's a bit where you understandably got emotional. I got when I saw, I wasn't even there, but and I did consider actually going, but I thought with my health and with COVID-19, me and Shay didn't think it was a good idea to go, although we were both up for going. But just seeing the clip, I was emotional. So let me play it now.
George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd!
It's actually getting quite emotional. When they start to actually recite his name, George Floyd's name, you realise that this guy, I don't know, there's something in it that just makes you feel like this actually could, God willing, be the beginning of some serious change. Weird. I've never seen this before. I've never seen this before. Wow. There's thousands of people.
So I get emotional even seeing it now, literally.
Oh, bruv. That we saw an image bearer being murdered in one of the most horrible, callous ways. And that was traumatic to see someone not given the dignity that an image bearer, aka someone made in the image of God, should have. And then on the streets, you had thousands of people giving him dignity, saying his name. And
never seen that before, ever. There's been Philando Castile, there's been Eric Garner, there's been Tamir Rice. There's been a list of names of people, and maybe they'll be saying their names in protests in America, but never here with so many different people who, like, I was moved because I had compounding emotions, which is I'm hearing his name. This guy's died halfway across the world. I don't know who he is, but I'm hearing his name on the streets of London. I'm looking around and I'm seeing people who are even further removed from him. We're a part of the human race, but at the same time, sometimes we're in our tribes, but they're in a different tribe, but they're still saying his name. And I was like, this is emotional. What? And Duncan, I think a lot of it has to do with the way that he died. And it was such a callous, calculated, if that was a dog, Duncan, you would have dog lovers fight that policeman and get him off. You'd have dog lovers saying, what the hell are you doing to that Alsatian? Get off. Do you know what I mean? Because we do that for animals. But here you had a human being. And for me, it was a picture of the problem, not just the problem of, violence and people kill each other, but the problem of systematic racism. Because here's someone who's paid by George Floyd and his taxes. George Floyd pays the police department to serve and protect, which is what they are sworn to do. But here, the police department, the system, has its knee on George Floyd's neck, not for 1 or 2 minutes, but for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And it was, I've said to people as well, Duncan, what were they waiting for? Like, why were they waiting? It's almost as though this was a public hanging and we needed to see it. And, there were 4 police officers or however many there. There was they weren't waiting for backup because they had the situation under control. He was in handcuffs. So it almost felt like this was a public lynching. And I think that caught the attention of everyone who previously was saying there isn't a problem. Black people need to be a little bit more complicit when police, they need to calm down and not be so reactive. This, I think, woke up every single, I wouldn't call people racist, but I would say people that have a racial implicit bias, which is they see a white man if you walked into a an aeroplane and you saw 4 white pilots, you don't think anything of it. You walk past the door and you see 4 black pilots, you might stop and think, oh my God, are we going to be all right? Are we going to get to our destination? Because there is that racial implicit bias, just because of the way that the world is wired in regards to this hierarchy of race. And I think everyone that might have had that racial implicit bias in the past, when they saw George's unfortunate killing, something in them triggered and they said, oh my God, there is a problem that I've been denying for so long. And so it just galvanized the world. And it was it's unfortunate it needed to come to that in order to get the reaction that we currently have. But yeah, it has come to this, hasn't it?
Mm. Yeah. And so from this point, like, you've got the solidarity right now. What concrete steps would you like to see happen that will actually affect change, so that we're not just coming back round in circle in a few years and nothing's changed?
Okay, so you've got so many people who could answer that a lot better than I could in regards to what could change in regards to laws and statistics. I'm a bit of a big picture person in regards to the human heart, because unless something changes in the human heart, we're going to enter back into the system of things repeating themselves. So my overall hope and goal would be that there is a genuine move to have more empathy and compassion. That's the key thing that gets legislation changed, that gets protests, that gets statues removed or whatever. And what my hope would be that everyone genuinely has more empathy. So empathy and compassion. And in essence, like I said, my key change, if it was to be a legislative one, would be education, and re-education at the end of that, in the area of not just teaching British history in terms of colonialism, giving us a much more equal opportunity in the area of learning history. So many people in school know about slavery and Black history, but I don't know about colonialism. How come I don't know about your history in terms of the things that we should learn from the past in order to not repeat them in the future? Germany made it a fundamental thing to teach what happened in the Second World War as a way to atone for their sins, as a way to say we're going to learn from the past in order to protect the future. Because if we don't learn from the past, we're going to repeat the past in the future. So for Britain to not do that, I know the British Empire isn't what it used to be, but there still is a risk that in the future we could see even this kind of systematic colonialism going on. This sense of prejudice that basically is a stronghold within our laws or within our approach to life. And that, I think, is what we currently are in. There is systematic, quote unquote, racism, systematic discrimination, systematic, I'll give you one example. People always ask me, where's the system? There is no systematic problem. Why is it, Duncan, that we always hear the term black on black violence? We've got people turn around and say, how come Black Lives Matter aren't around when there's, if a black man killed George Floyd, no one would be protesting, but because a white man killed him. Even the fact that you would have the audacity and the disingenuousness to actually think that is wrong, but it highlights the problem. There isn't a term such as white on white violence, even though white people kill white people. There isn't a term such as Asian on Asian violence, or Indian on Indian violence, or Chinese on Chinese violence. Oh, there's 2 guys that fought in Manchester the other day. There's a Mancunian versus Mancunian violence. Like, if you're going to have nomenclature and some form of common currency in how we label things, let it be equal. And the fact that we have the audacity to allow this pernicious, very nefarious term like black on black violence to exist, it shows you in and of itself there's something wrong with the system. And the media is a part of the system. And the fact that the media allows that narrative to perpetuate shows you that there is a problem. And I've just given you 1 out of a million examples, but it's a very clear, real and present example because we all use it. we all use that vernacular without asking ourselves, is this fair? Should I just see it as what I like to instead call, rather than black violence, call it youth violence. Call it serious youth violence, which is what it is. And every community has it, because it's more so to do with a class thing, or quote unquote class thing, or do you know what I mean? An inner city thing. You're not getting, black paramedics fighting black doctors. Do you know what I mean? Oh, black on black violence. That doesn't happen. You're only getting in specific areas like the inner city. So the reason I say empathy and compassion is because without empathy and compassion, you'll see black and black violence. But with empathy and compassion, you'll see serious youth violence. Do you know what I mean? So until we change the narrative and how we phrase and we label these terms, there is actually also a theory called labeling theory. Have you heard of that?
No, I don't think so.
Labeling theory is a theory that basically subscribes to the fact that people become what they are labeled. So if you label kids thugs, or if you label them, gangs, chances are they're going to start playing to that label. It's a very weird psychological phenomenon, but it occurs. And
it's like train a child in the way they should go, and they will walk in it. If you keep telling the child you're this, you're that, eventually it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as you live out the words spoken over you.
Absolutely. And so if we don't have empathy when we refer to certain communities and cultures, what we are doing inadvertently is perpetuating the problem. And that's what I would love to see change more than anything. Let's stop calling ourselves or calling each other by some of these labels that are pernicious, that are nefarious, that are very, insightful, and they create a culture of acceptance that is problematic. I don't want to be called a black thug. It's very interesting. If you listen to the news, and I challenge everyone listening to this, listen to the news and listen to the different ways that different people groups or different communities or different ethnicities, it's a good word, the way that different ethnicities are referred to. You've got thugs that went out, for example, last weekend, football thugs or football hooligans, and they're referred to as the far right, or they're referred to as, some of them may have never heard of the far right, but they were doing thuggery in the same way that the previous week you had the quote unquote Black Lives Matter movement, and they were known as thugs. They were called thugs. And it's sometimes that labeling that perpetuates the system or the cycle of linguistic racism or perception in the form of, you've got someone who's in Surrey who, isn't in a multicultural environment, who hears that news and they label every single black person in that crowd as a thug just because the media has informed them that they're a thug, even though there's probably people like me, furthest thing from a thug. I'm a peacemaker, but I was in the crowd to observe and see what's happening. So our perception needs to be more nuanced and more compassionate and more empathetic if we are to really move forward and remove this stigma and ugliness of quote unquote racism or skin discrimination.
I hear you, bruv. I totally agree. So to recap the things you just shared there, we need education. Education's really important because, so I did A-level history, okay, and I did not learn about the British Empire. I studied the Industrial Revolution. I did not study at all in the Industrial Revolution where we were getting our cotton from. Yeah. And how how that was actually coming from slavery. Wow. Even though at the time we were claiming that we had abolished slavery and abolished the slave trade and told people they shouldn't do slavery anymore. Yeah. And it's only been the last few years that I've been learning the history of the British Empire. Wow. But over 20 years ago, I was officially with the national curriculum learning history as we're supposed to be taught. Yeah. And I could have given you all the critique of Hitler and Nazi Germany, and I could have given you critique of Stalin and communism. Yeah. But I didn't know about the critique of the British Empire. And bruv, I've read things that are heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And the education thing is so deep, because I'm hearing now people upset that statues are being toppled over or vandalized, and I've heard there's a line that I think has been fed to people by the media, or someone clever has come up with this phrase, erasing history, even though no historian that I know of has ever said we preserve history through statues. For example, Hitler, there's no statues of Hitler around,
Statues
but we all know.
Honor. Statues are to do with honor, not to do with history. There's a
Right.
There's a historical context to the honor that we're basically subscribing someone by putting a statue of them in a specific place. And you can learn some aspects of history from a statue, the plaque that's on the front, but it's more so to do with honor. And if you are honoring people that don't deserve honor at a time where you agree that they shouldn't deserve honor, then you are validating their sins. We take Jimmy Savile statues down because we know he is dishonorable. Can you imagine how disrespectful it would be to any of the children who were, unfortunately affected by Jimmy Savile? Can you imagine how horrid it would be to place a statue outside of their home? It goes, like I said, about empathy and compassion. And that's what it comes down to. If you have empathy and compassion for that child, you would not put a statue of a person that hurt that child in their face. And unfortunately, we claim to not be a racist society. Great. That's a good buzzword, Boris. Love it. But how are you proving that? One way to prove that might be to say, we're going to make the home that we're embracing you and inviting you into a little bit more conducive, a little bit more comfortable. There's not going to be pictures on the wall of, people that abused you or insulted you, or else, after someone leaves court and basically sees the person that physically attacked them and beat them or raped them or, abused them, sent to prison, as they rightly should be, you're not going to be given a plaque or a statue of that person for you to take home and put on your mantelpiece. It's common sense that some of this stuff is going to be offensive. And I appreciate that there is a conversation to be had about, well, where do we draw the line? Everyone's like, where do we draw the line? Nelson Mandela used to be a terrorist. Maybe we should take his down. Let's have a discussion. If we're not prepared to even have a discussion, then we're kind of saying your opinion doesn't count and we're just going to do our own thing. Then you're basically saying I'm not welcome in your home. Yeah. Which is also my home because I was born here.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also why we need the education so that we understand that Black British is British, that we actually we understand that.
We're still having this conversation. It's crazy, isn't it, dude?
It's mad. I want to borrow David Alashogo's point about statues, where he says, listen, what you got to understand is that the statues are of people that no one liked in their day. Like he said, listen, they're the statues of the politicians.
Wow.
Whoever likes their politicians.
Wow.
You get me? It's like they get put up afterwards.
Yeah.
Where, when the person's dead. And so when people are being fed this line of, oh, your history's being erased, if we could have more education, then we'd be understanding. Actually, some of these guys we wanted to protect their statues. Actually, they're a bit suspect. And people,
Can I tell you a story?
Go on.
So me and my wife were in Portugal a couple of years ago. Yeah, it's funny, but it's not funny. So we're in Portugal, and we basically said, let's go out and do a little tourist sightseeing. Do you know what I mean? Where do we go? Because we're in Portugal, we don't know. And we find a place called Lagos. Yeah, but it looks like Lagos. It's exactly written in the same way. My wife's from Nigeria. We thought to ourselves, wouldn't it be nice to go there and take a picture by the actual label, the actual plaque that says Lagos? And then we can tell our friends on Twitter and Instagram that we've gone to Nigeria. Anyway, do you know what I mean? It was a nice place to go to. So we get in a tour bus now, and we go to this place, and the tour guide starts telling us a little bit about it. When we get there, Duncan, I kid you not, there's this open market and there's this statue erected to the guy. I should know the guy's name, Henry or something. I can send you pictures afterwards of who he was. And the tour guide basically he brings people closer in the tour, in the group, and he says, the Americans think they started slavery, but it wasn't them, it was us. This is Henry whoever, and he basically was one of the first to travel to Africa and take the Africans and bring them to this very market. And he was celebrating it, Duncan. And I think for a minute...
Well, he was talking to you two or the whole group?
The whole group. But we were in the group, and he could clearly see that our skin wasn't the same complexion as him. And so chances are he's speaking about our ancestors. My wife's Nigerian. If you're going to African, I'm obviously African as well via Jamaica. But you're speaking to the children of the slaves that you're speaking about died probably in this very market. And he was boasting about it, Duncan. And it horrified me because I was like, dude, you gotta be kidding me, right? And I looked up at the statue, and it was a huge statue similar to our, Winston Churchill or the lions that are in Trafalgar Square. It was just this beautiful statue. And the statue I didn't have a problem with the statue up until that point, until I realized who the person was. And I explained to the tour guide afterwards that we're going to leave, we're going to stay here, because he wanted us to go on. Because I tried to explain to him that, dude, like, this is like, I'm basically a Jewish person being walked through Auschwitz by a tour guide who's telling me about how many people died here and boasting about the fact that the Germans killed so many people here. It was one of those, I thought I was in a matrix. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So I say that to say, and yeah, we discovered that was a slave market that a lot of West Africans were taken to before being sold to America and to England and stuff. And so the problem isn't so much the statues, it's what they represent. And what they represent needs to be dismantled before even the statues. So I don't really care about statues coming down. I'm more so about what they represent in terms of in the human heart. So if in the human heart, like this tour guide, you honor and revere that statue when that is a slave owner and a person who is technically a kidnapper. You've kidnapped my ancestors and brought them and sold them like Holston. It's what they represent. Now, historically speaking, I learned a bit of history that day, but it was history that I wish I learned, or I could have easily learned in a Google search, not standing on holiday, a beautiful holiday at that, being educated by a tour guide who wanted to celebrate and honor this murderous, slave trader.
So we've already had our history erased by us not being taught what actually properly happened. The statues coming down is not erasing anyone's history. The reality is we need to actually get back our history and find out exactly what happened and be honest about it.
You know what, Duncan, the history's already been erased. The shame of the colonial empire and a lot of the sins of a lot of the people that we celebrate has already been erased. So you're not removing the histories by removing the statues. To some degree, the argument about removing the statue is unburying and excavating the history, because some of these people you wouldn't know anything about unless we said that that's a slave trader and we'd like that statue to be removed, please. You didn't know about that person prior to that. And so if that's a history that you want to honor, and by keeping the statue up, then there's a problem there that I don't think you recognize. So I do think the statue argument to some degree is a little bit of a red herring. We are focusing on it, but at the same time, it is important, and it represents a bigger argument about what we're wanting to honor and what we're wanting to not. Because the biggest symbol, for example, is, and I discovered this literally just today, Duncan. Did you know that literally slave traders were compensated by by the British, and basically their compensation was, it's like the GDP was crazy. It's like 40 million, I think, at the time. And the slaves, obviously, and their ancestors weren't compensated at all. We're constantly fighting for reparations, which a deaf ear seems to be turned on from the English government and the American government. Whereas the slave traders were not only honored with statues, but also honored with finances that literally, I couldn't believe this, the payments to the slave traders ended 5 years ago, 2015. it's just beyond amusing anymore, because you have people say there's no systematic racism, there's no issue, carry on, there's nothing to see here. And then we dig up the dirt and we find the new bone in the closet, and we're like, wait a minute, the skeletons that you've got in your closet are disgusting. Let's bring them out. And this is the thing, Duncan, and it's the biggest issue. And it comes back to compassion and empathy again. As a Christian, you'll know that unless someone repents, there is a problem. Whatever that problem is, there is a problem unless someone repents. Unless someone says sorry and turns 180 degrees and goes in the opposite direction, there is a problem that you cannot continue with them in. If Britain, and this is my challenge, if Britain is really sorry for what happened in slavery, you've got to show it with more than just cheap words. We haven't even had the cheap words, because there hasn't been an official apology to a lot of the African countries where this stuff was removed. We're fighting to even get things out of the British Museum that were stolen from those African countries during colonialism. So an apology won't do at the moment. You'd need to do a little bit more. You'd need to do more than apologize, which is repent. Prove some of this level of, repentance and desire forgiveness, which is probably part of the problem, because pride and the great British Empire might feel too prideful to actually say, we're going to say sorry to this country that we completely obliterated, changed their whole ecosystem, changed their whole language, changed their surnames. We're going to say sorry to that country, and we're going to pay some reparations. In 100 years after that apology, I think you won't see the disharmony that you're currently seeing, because there will be a sense of closure. There will be a sense of peace. My surname right now, I have no idea how I got it. Your surname is Forbes. You'll probably be able to trace back and work out where the Forbes line began. I don't know who in my lineage was Graham, but Graham isn't an African name, and it's not it's not a Jamaican name. It's a Scottish name, which means House of the Grey. I have no idea how I got it. Chances are it was from a slave trader who would name the entire slave herd that he would have. All of your surnames are now called Graham. 5,000 people, you're now called Graham. And then go off into the rest of humanity and create more Grahams. I say that to say that's an example of how the course of the past has affected the present. And so we constantly live with our history having been erased and changed. I wish I knew my African ancestors. I don't even like saying ancestors, because it makes you think like 500 years ago, the deep ancestors. I wish I knew I think my great grandmother was a slave. There's some connection in my family line of there being slaves that were taken to Jamaica, and but I have no history of them because of the way that our history has been broken up by the British Empire that we're being refused to learn about. So I just say that to say that there is an example of, if every Englishman had an African or Nigerian surname, there would be a problem in the past that is affecting the present. We constantly live with the repercussions and consequences of the past. So we would just like to learn about it in a little bit more of an equal way, rather than it just being thrust upon us in the form of Black History Month. You've got a month to learn about your history, and then we're going to shut it down for the other 11 months.
Yeah. I hear you, bruv. There's a lot in what you just shared, and I really appreciate you sharing that. I think I wanna come to one question, which is important, which is that a lot of people right now are experiencing and re-experiencing racial trauma.
Yeah.
People, I know particularly like people our age are remembering stuff from childhood.
Yeah.
Of not just verbal racist attacks, but violent attacks that people have experienced. And there's a lot of memories that are coming up for a lot of people, and a lot of people having struggle sleeping at the moment.
Yeah.
How does it feel hearing people complaining about statues and complaining about they're worried their history is being erased, when there's actually so many people right now who are actually feeling trauma about events that have happened to them personally. I don't even know if that's a question that I should even ask. I don't even know the right way of asking it, but I feel there's people out there on the internet who need to understand that there's a difference here.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good question. In truth, so I've got a few different answers. I don't mind as much the statues. I understand the statues thing, but what I look at the bigger picture of it is the fact that that is the issue rather than the trauma and everything else highlights again the problem of a lack of empathy and a lack of compassion. The reason why people need to have empathy and compassion is to understand what has happened that has caused the protests, sometimes even the looting, and just the response, because it can be so easily, and I've heard people say it could be so easy to say that happened to someone in America, it didn't happen to someone in the UK, so there shouldn't be an issue. That's like basically saying, off the back of Harvey Weinstein going down and there being a court case happening in America about the abuse that was suffered by the women that he basically attacked. Someone in the UK who went through a similar attack here, they shouldn't have a connection. They shouldn't have an emotional response. Anytime something comes up in the media, like a trauma that is basically inflicted upon another human being in another part of the world, it can affect us. So even with the Jeffrey Epstein case, the ideas of, the kids that he had abused and stuff, you'll have people in the UK, all over the world, being affected because of what's known as secondary trauma. There is literally, there is something basically called media-induced secondary traumatic stress in perceptions as well of distress. And what that basically is, and it's known as STS if you search for that in Google. What that basically is, it's you can basically start to feel a trauma upon you by just perceiving and seeing something. And we all know it to be true. We've seen things online that have moved us, that have caused us to shut our laptop and see, like, I don't want to ever see that again. And that's definitely connected to death quite a lot, which is why you get post-traumatic stress syndrome by ex-war veterans, because they've seen people die. They've seen death to a degree that I think naturally we weren't supposed to see. It's not natural for us to see certain things. And so even me myself, Duncan, I've sometimes said to myself, I've just seen a video, like when I saw the Ahmaud Arbery case, I literally, to see this man jogging and then to have him being confronted by these two gun-wielding individuals who then shoot him, and then to see his body fall to the ground. And it literally looked like what we see in a film. It was horrific, but to know that I've just witnessed a man take his last breath and being killed in such a horrific way. If I don't have empathy, if I don't have compassion, then I will see that and turn over and watch Kittens or something else. But the fact that I do have empathy and compassion, I get moved to tears. I start to feel a little bit jittery. And even then I say to myself, why am I feeling this way? I didn't know him. But I think it goes another level of empathy when you realize that someone that you've just seen died because of what you have on your body. The melanin count that I have, that's different than the melanin count, say, that you have, Duncan, would cause a killer to kill me rather than, say, you. When that processes through our minds, people from the Black community or African diaspora, that I've just witnessed the modern day lynching, everything rises to the surface that connects you to that trauma. What do I mean by that? Every time I've been called the N-word, every time I've had an old lady hold her bag on the bus because they thought this black man is scary, every time literally that I've been refused a job because I think they saw that my name was CV, on the CV was Shabazz Lalumba Graham, that doesn't sound English. Everything rises to the surface. And obviously, you know that there's billions of different incidences in everyone's life that's on a protest that connect you to some form of prejudice or discrimination that gets risen to the surface. And in life, we have to bury it and push it down basically we have to suppress it. But when there is a killing like George Floyd, the lid comes off, and you're left collecting the pieces of all the traumatic experiences that you've had in life and putting them back under. But sometimes you don't want to put them back under the carpet. You actually want to say, I need to vent this. And whether it's jumping on YouTube and doing a like spiel about the experiences you have, whether it's protesting, whether it's all of that thing is cathartic, and it's important. In the same way that you have people that literally were abused as children, not telling anyone for 40 years because they thought, nah, no one's going to know that part of my life. I'm going to bury it so deep under the carpet. They watched Jeffrey Epstein being trialed and hearing his accounts of abuse, and then the lid comes off, and they go to a specialist, or they tell their wife. These things are obvious as to why there should be or is such a reaction to the perception that we see of trauma on TV. And so social media has basically just spread images of distress. And I'm not saying it's not right for them to do that, because if we didn't see the video, the people that killed Ahmaud Arbery wouldn't have been arrested. There's a saying which is, they weren't arrested because the police saw the video, because the police saw the video the day after Ahmaud Arbery was killed. The police arrested those killers because we saw the video, and we basically said, this ain't right. Why aren't you arresting them? The empathy and the compassion is needed in order to change this systematic racism is crazy. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's important for people to know this, because not just for people who are experiencing secondary trauma, but for people who aren't understanding why anyone's worked up right now. For people who are thinking, well, hang on a minute, the most important thing right now is that our statues are being taken down and people are breaking social distancing to go on protests. I think I understand that with a certain narrative and education that people are brought up with, that makes sense to a lot of people. But I really hope that there's some people watching this video that would get that actually there are people who are really traumatized right now, who are dealing with that trauma. And it's really apples and oranges when, if someone says, well, you're erasing my history, you shouldn't be throwing down statues. That's apples and oranges to someone who's experiencing racial trauma right now.
Yeah. But again, there is a saying that is, a problem isn't a problem until it's your problem. And so what there is a disconnect between the problem of another person who happens to have a different skin complexion than you. And so it's as clear as that. And that's like why I say legislation isn't going to change that. Empathy and compassion is. And if you have and dig deep and find a little bit more compassion than just this carte blanche kind of disassociation, I'm only going to focus on the problem that's affecting me, which is my history is being removed in the form of these statues. People who I don't know and don't care about are being removed. Then that's an issue. And to some degree, though, I do get it, and I want to respect it, because Winston Churchill, for example, a very complex character, good and bad in the form of his activities in life. I can understand why he's there's a lot of issues around him. Do you know what I mean? And I wouldn't advise that people pull down his statues, especially before we deal with the underlying issue, like I said, of more empathy and compassion. I would love to get to a stage, if we are going to basically be a much more holistic community and family in the UK, we basically get to a stage where there's re-education, there's understanding from both parties, quote unquote, black and white. We get to a stage where one day black people don't have to pull down a statue violently, because that can just be erected again. And if you pull down a statue before people are ready for it to be pulled down, you are basically creating more hatred towards you, because people will erect a statue of hate in their heart towards you. That's why I say violence is this vicious circle. I don't want to end I don't want to add another spoke to the wheel of the vicious wheel of violence, but I just want to break the wheel. Do you know what I mean? We want to break the wheel of systematic oppression and discrimination, and the only way to do that is through love and compassion and empathy. It's not through violence. So I would love to see if people genuinely are up for the long game of re-educating and teaching things that can bring empathy. In the future, maybe there could be a vote or a referendum about what statues should be removed. And wouldn't it be amazing if quote unquote white Brits turned around and said, yeah, actually, that statue up there is a little bit problematic because my, black neighbors, do you know what I mean, would find that very offensive in the same way that I'd find a statue of Hitler offensive outside my door. And it sounds like such an idealistic world, but in truth, we're only going to lose people if we try to, tear down their heroes, because every hero is another man's villain and every villain is another man's hero. But we need to basically have a discussion as to who gets removed and how.
Bruv, you should do a book of quotes, the Shabazz book of quotes. I love some of the quotes you're dropping in here. Yeah, no, I hear you. And also just want to point out to any of our American viewers, please understand that our context is different to yours.
Yeah.
So understand that some of the things that we're talking about here, you might be thinking, well, in America, that wouldn't work. And that's cool. But we are very different to America, and we have a different history to America. And we probably are better off looking in the UK, as we look for solutions, probably are better off looking at what's happened in European countries, to which we actually have way more similarity with, especially in terms of the European countries that were colonizers, rather than America, which was a colony. And so I think, for example, Germany, it took years and years to deal with Germany's past, but a lot of it happened in people's homes, children chatting with their parents, and a lot of conversations as families grappling with the past, like children even asking parents, like, what did you do in the war? Like, and having those really difficult conversations. And so it sounds like what you're saying, Shabazz, is we badly need the conversations about this stuff.
Yeah.
And we need to do it in a way as well that wins people over.
Absolutely.
And that, yeah.
If we don't win people's hearts, we will create more hard hearts. And that's what's going to get us back here in another 100 years, another 50 years. We're not going to budge people if we genuinely try to do it through hate. And yeah, we're just going to create more villains. And that's why I had a debate with someone on Facebook the other day that was trying to condone violence at the protests. And they were thinking that nothing has ever been won without violence. And I understood some of his points, but I said, every brick that lands on a police officer, an innocent police officer at that's just doing his job, is 100 stories about how that police officer got hit by a black man with a brick. And that becomes a perpetuating story that travels down to that police officer's children, and that travels from the police officer's children to the police officer's children's friends, and becomes a new wall in this divide between us as, people with different skin pigments. I know a lot of people are going to think I'm idealistic, but I'm just genuinely trying to offer a new solution.
Yeah, and bruv, I think based on what you've said as well, is if anyone's feeling like you're idealistic, I think what you'd be saying is well, let's have a conversation about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there was more I wanted to chat about, but I think we covered so much stuff that we leave it there. But I do want to say thank you so much, Shabazz, for everything you've shared.
Thank you, bro.
I've learned a lot listening to you, and I think you've given a lot of food for thought, and there's so much to take away from what you've shared.
Can I share one last thing, Duncan?
Yeah.
A friend of mine, what you'd call a white gentleman, a Welsh guy, and myself, we've been having discussions about race, say, for the last 4 years. And we've decided off the back of this that we're going to start a campaign called One Race. where we're going to be literally pushing for to introduce in a creative way this narrative, and this solution. And so, watch this.
What's the website, bruv?
We're still in the process of buying the website,
yet?
But in the future,
Okay.
literally just type in Shabazz Graham or Mark Evans, and
I'll put it below.
you'll put it below. Yeah,
Yeah, when you got the
Literally, when we
definite
got it.
website, I put it below.
Awesome.
Yeah, in the details.
But yeah,
Section.
one race, man. We need to start promoting the truth rather than living under the fictive concept of race, which is causing so much confusion.
All right, thanks so much, bruv. It's just been a blessing to chat to you and learn from you. And
Likewise, man.
so if anyone's got any questions in YouTube world, feel free to drop some questions below. And you know, maybe Shabazz on YouTube would even try and answer anyone's questions. Let's be civil, and let's, in honor of Shabazz, let's keep the conversation going. All right. God bless and
Thank you, sir.
goodbye.